Hello and welcome back. We're going to be looking at countercultures today, going from the 50s into the 60s. So we talked about how the 50s were all about the idea of conformity. Everything looking the same, having that nuclear, perfect family, mom, dad, two kids, a boy and a girl, living in the White House with a white picket fence, that women were supposed to stay home, that idea of America, the suburbs. We talked about how in the 50s, because of that fear of communism, there was this real focus on it being the same, not standing out, conforming to this idea of what it was to be, quote unquote, an American. And this conformity meant that people didn't try and think outside the box. Companies wanted you to think a specific way. And that conformity of the 50s is going to lead into countercultures of the 60s. So what are countercultures? Well, countercultures are these subgroups in society. So you have this main society, like the main idea of norms, like what it is considered to be, what everyone kind of agrees with, these set of values. And that's like this main group of society. And then within that, you have these smaller groups or these subgroups. And these smaller groups tend to distance themselves from the mainstream, from that main group. And these are countercultures. So what is this the opposite of? Well, it's the opposite of conformity. And that conformity of the 50s really is going to be pushed away. And a reaction to that is these countercultures of the 60s. One of the very first countercultures is going to be the beatniks. They're going to begin as kind of like these outcast students. They're going to be graduates or dropouts. Really starts in Columbia University in New York. And what this is it's basically a way of challenging or going against what society says is the way people should act. It's going against that conformity. A lot of this is going to be poems. They're going to read a lot of poetry. It's going to be in a lot of cafes, coffee houses. They have very specific music, using drums. You can see the hats. And it was really a push against all of those things that mainstream society said that you were supposed to do. And so the beatniks really start this counterculture movement, pushing against what is considered what everyone should be, how everyone should act, everyone should think, everyone should do. So the beatniks really start this in New York. That's going to spurn off or go into the hippie movement. And the hippie movement the hippies were also a subgroup of the 1960s and early 1970s. It was a counterculture. It started in the United States. Now, kind of what we think we know of the hippies is actually a lot of times not true. These are just some of my favorite hippie quotes. You're either on the bus or off the bus. Don't trust anybody over 30. If it feels good, do it. Go with the flow. And what these should tell you is that the hippie movement was really going against those ideals of American society. And if you look at it, don't trust anybody over 30. These are going to be younger people. These are going to be people in their 20s. And when we look at the people who were hippies and who made up this counterculture, they were mostly kids from middle-class backgrounds. A lot of them were tired of the war in Vietnam. They were tired of what they saw as injustices in the U.S., especially against minority groups. And so this is a way of going against that. Now, the hippie movement didn't challenge the mainstream or challenge the system in the U.S., so what they did instead was they basically just turned their backs on the mainstream. They're like, you do you, we're just going to have our own culture. We're not going to fight against this. We're not going to try and change yours. We're just going to have our own. And that's very different than what we see with a lot of other groups, where other groups are trying to change mainstream society's ideas, or they're trying to change, the United States. The hippies instead are like, we're just going to do our own thing. And this new society that they're trying to create was based on this ideas of peace and love coexisting together, working together, that having things didn't matter, that everyone was in a group and it was all about the group. It's important to note that they were middle-class people for the most part because their parents are going to support them while this is going on. A lot of hippies didn't work. They are going to just try and make their way, but their parents are going to be giving them money when they need it. Because they've had that middle-class background, they are going against some of those ideas of the middle class. They are educated for the most part. A lot of them are going to have went to college. And so these are going to be the people who make up this hippie movement. This is just kind of a little bit of background information. The hippie era is also known as the Age of Aquarius. A lot of hippies lived in communes, and communes mean where everyone just lives together. This could be where you all live in a space. There could be rooms. Everyone just kind of sleeps wherever. A lot of these, they're going to create these communes out on farmland, and everyone's going to work together to make food. But it's basically everyone is just a group. The capital of the hippies was San Francisco, and there's a street called Haight-Ashbury Street, and it was like the place for hippies. In fact, if you go to San Francisco today and you go to Haight-Ashbury, you can still see, like, there's flowers all over. You can still see those influences. Lots of tie-dye, obviously. Lots of people lived in buses. They just kind of drove from place to place. This was families too. Hippies tend to wear kind of ragged jeans. They wore what were called love beads, military uniforms, Native American ornaments, tie-dyed t-shirts. It was a very mixed mash of colors and ideas that were all put together. Drugs were a huge part of the lifestyle. Mostly it was marijuana, but LSD and acid were also part of their culture. A lot of the hippies are going to die from drug overdoses. Two of the famous rock stars during this hippie era are going to be Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, and they're both going to die from drug overdoses in the 1970s. So drugs were definitely a part of this culture that was there. So we get to what's called the Summer of Love. The Summer of Love starts really from a song, and it's talking about going to San Francisco. And in the song it says, if you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. This literally starts this idea of the Summer of Love and this whole flower child thing that we think of when the hippies. What happened was people heard this song, and it just inspired all of these young people to literally travel from all over the world to San Francisco. There's an estimated 75,000 to 100,000 people who went to San Francisco just because of this. They wore flowers in their hair. They would hand out flowers, and this starts this idea of the flower child. When the Summer of Love ended, thousands of hippies are going to leave San Francisco. They just went for the summer, and then they are going to head back. And a lot of them are going to create communities, these communes. And when you look at these communes, a lot of them are going to be in Northern California, Colorado, New Mexico, Tennessee, Canada, and they live this alternative lifestyle with turning their back. The hippie movement's going to end as we go into the 1970s. There are still going to be pockets of these hippie communes, but really the heyday of the hippies is going to be in the mid-60s to the early 70s. This just shows you a picture. You can see the kids. People had children, just brought them with, and children were raised by everyone. You'd see a lot of children who were named after things in nature. It was a very nature-based movement. And like I said, the difference between this and a lot of other movements that we're going to see is that the hippies aren't trying to change society. They just turn away from society and create their own. One of the other ways that we see countercultures and this push against conformity in the 60s and early 70s is going to be art. And art's going to be really popular, and it's really going to be different than what we've seen in the past, because what's happening is people are pushing against that idea of conformity, and part of what that means is people start to say, what is art? What does art mean? And so they're going to push the boundaries of what were considered art before this. Art is going to open up in all different ways, and this is going to be really led by Andy Warhol. And this is Andy Warhol, so you can see a picture of him. And you probably have seen his work in some way or another. What he would do is take these everyday objects that he thought everyone might have at their home, and he is going to show how that was being conformist, and then he's going to have all these different pictures and colors to show these variations as a push against conformity. This is hard edge painting. It really starts with California artists. You can see this is one of them, and it's like a painting with using acrylics, and it's on plexiglass, pushing against those ideas of art. This is from the minimalist movement. You'll see a lot of these sculptures today in larger cities, but it was completely new at the time. This is going to be body art, and body art becomes really big along with conceptual art, once again pushing the boundaries of what is considered art. Music is going to be another way that countercultures are going to push against society, push against that conformity. In the 1950s, we're watching, even the early 1960s, we're seeing a lot of these artists in like suits. If you think about the early years of the Beatles, the early years of Elvis, when we looked at Elvis, and now we're going to go into these artists that are growing out their hair. Their music is going to be very hard-edged. They're going to have like folk music that's moved into it. You're seeing electric guitars really come in. And so you see this explosion of individuality in music as well. And that is also part of this counterculture movement. That's all that we have today for the countercultures movement. Next time we'll be looking at some other minorities trying to get equality in the United States.